You still want to help me find Papa? Asked Shmuel, and Bruno nodded quickly. Of course, he said, although finding Shmuel's Papa was not as important in his mind as the prospect of exploring the world on the other side of the fence. I wouldn't let you down. Shmuel lifted the bottom of the fence off the ground and handed the outfit underneath to Bruno, being particularly careful to not let it touch the muddy ground below. The Boy in the Striped Pajamas by John Boyne. It didn't take long to get where they were going. Bruno opened his eyes in wonder at the things he saw. In his imagination, he had thought that all the huts were full of happy families, some of whom sat outside in rocking chairs in the evening and told stories. He thought that all the boys and girls who lived here would be in different groups, playing tennis or football, skipping and drawing out squares for hopscotch on the ground. As it turned out, all the things he thought were there weren't. There were no grown-ups sitting on rocking chairs on their porches, and the children weren't playing games in groups. Instead, there were crowds of people sitting together in groups, staring at the ground, looking horribly sad. They all had one thing in common. They were all terribly skinny, and their eyes were sunken, and they all had shaved heads, which Bruno thought must have meant there had been an outbreak of lice there too. In one corner, Bruno could see 3 soldiers who seemed to be in charge of a group of about 20 men. They were shouting at them, and some of the men had fallen to their knees and were remaining there with their heads in their hands. In another corner, he could see more soldiers standing around and laughing and looking down at the barrels of their guns and aiming them in random directions, but not firing them. In fact, everywhere he looked, all he could see was 2 different types of people, either happy, laughing, shouting soldiers in their uniforms, or unhappy, crying people in their striped pajamas, most of whom seemed to be staring into space, as if they were actually asleep. I don't think I like it here, said Bruno after a while. Neither do I, said Shmuel. I think I ought to go home, said Bruno. Shmuel stopped walking and stared at him. But Papa, he said, you promised you would help me find him. Bruno thought about it for a while. He wasn't one to go back on promises, especially when it was the last time they might be seeing each other. All right, he said, although he felt a lot less confident now than he had before. But where should we look? You said we need to find evidence, said Shmuel. So Bruno spent an hour and a half searching for evidence, but they didn't find anything. I think I need to go home now. Will you walk me to the fence? Asked Bruno. But at that moment there was a loud whistle, and the soldiers gathered the people in the camp together. What's happening? What's going on? Asked Bruno. It happens sometimes. They make people go on marches. The whistles blew again, and this time the group of people started to slowly march together. Bruno frowned. He looked up at the sky, and as he did so there was another loud sound. This time the sound of thunder overhead, and just as quickly the sky seemed to grow even darker, almost black, and rain poured down even more heavily than it had in the morning. That's it, he said to Shmuel. I'm going to catch a cold out here. I have to go home. But just as he said this, his feet brought him up a set of steps, and as he marched on, he found there was no more rain coming down anymore, because they were all piling into a long room that was surprisingly warm, and must have been very securely built, because no rain was getting in anywhere. In fact, it felt completely airtight. Well, that's something, he said, glad to be out of the storm for a few minutes at least. I expect we'll have to wait here till it eases off, and then I'll get to go home. Shmuel gathered himself very close to Bruno and looked up at him in fright. I'm sorry we didn't find your Papa, said Bruno. It's all right, said Shmuel. And I'm sorry we didn't really get to play. But when you come to Berlin, that's what we'll do. And I'll introduce you to... Oh, what were their names again? Asked Bruno, frustrated because they were supposed to be his 3 best friends for life, but they had all vanished from his memory. He couldn't remember any of their names and couldn't picture any of their faces. Actually, he said, looking down at Shmuel, it doesn't matter whether I do or not. They're not my best friends anymore anyways. He looked down and did something quite out of character for him. He grabbed Shmuel's tiny hand in his and squeezed tightly. You're my best friend, Shmuel, he said. My best friend for life. Shmuel may as well have opened his mouth to say something back, but Bruno never heard it because at that moment there was a loud gasp from all the people who had filled the room, as the door at the front was suddenly closed and a loud metallic sound rang from the outside. Bruno raised an eyebrow, unable to understand the sense of all this, but he assumed that it had something to do with keeping the rain out and stopping people from catching colds. And then the room went very dark, and somehow, despite the chaos that followed, Bruno found that he was still holding Shmuel's hand in his own, and nothing in the world would have persuaded him to let it go.